Hello, everybody. It's another week with me, Michael Leclerc, and today we're going to be talking about Jevon's paradox efficiency dilemma. Before we get into that, I just want to quickly remind everybody that essay assignment number 1 on the global or national environmental agreements is due tonight at midnight, February 18th. If you hand it in after that fact, there will be a 5% deduction. Standard essay format is required for it. I've had a couple people asking questions and in terms of footnotes and bibliographies and that sort of stuff. I've provided some links. I will post a link to a website that goes over MLA formatting for footnotes and bibliographies. Hopefully that helps. If not, feel free to reach out to me through email. I'm happy to help. So Jevon's paradox efficiency dilemma is what we're going to be talking today. Important to note that this subject will be on the midterm as well. So the midterm that is next week, I'll talk about that a little bit briefly at the very end of this presentation. It will consist of weeks 1 through 6, so it will have this stuff as well. So study it for the midterm, I guess. So to start things off, to understand the impact of making something more efficient, such as an appliance or a production process, on the economy, we have to understand the implications of making these improvements. Why are we making these improvements? There's always a delicate balance between efficiency and consumer spending habits. Our past shows what happens when we make sudden changes too quickly. A good example of this is these two pictures to the right, showing the Great Depression that happened in the 1920s and 30s. Late 1920s anyways. So one of the reasons we create more technology or we improve on some sort of process or technology, why do you think that is? We want to make things more efficient for ourselves. If we can make things easier for us, that's always something that we strive towards, right? As human beings, we want to reap the benefits of what we sow. And so in order to do that, it typically means that we want to make advancements to benefit us as much as possible. So if our machines use less energy, will we save energy, or will we just use the machines more with the money we save in fuel? That's kind of what the big question is. As another way of looking at it, does making a car or any appliance or process, such as a fridge or something along those lines, more efficient really save on fuel consumed, or do we just use it more because it costs less to run? The truth is there are twice as many cars on the roads today than in 1970 after the fuel crisis. There are over 1 billion cars registered worldwide, and 2 billion cars are expected within the next 20 years. Efficiency in both production and fuel consumption play a large part in the increases. We've been able to make cars more quickly, sure, but on top of that, you've seen it yourself when you go to buy cars, or even just when you're looking at cars on commercials or advertisements. They're just more fuel efficient as well. And even the parts that are being used, they're more plastics instead of just the big metal skeletons and stuff like that. So here are a couple of things that just show energy efficiency in different appliances. So efficiency talk is everywhere. As I just literally mentioned, car buyers can purchase ever more fuel efficient cars. There's LED light bulbs that achieve unprecedented efficiencies in turning electricity into visible light. We have solar panels that are more efficient each year. In fact, solar panels can also be used to offset some of the electrical power that you yourself buy. And in some cases, the government will actually buy power from you. Farmers are urged toward fertilizer use efficiency in order to produce more and bigger crops in order to make bigger profits. Our Energy Star appliances are the most efficient ever, as are the furnaces and the air conditioners in many homes. We talked about that in an earlier week where we're using different coolants in order to produce less greenhouse gases. It's better, right? This is a good thing. There's new high efficient refrigerators that consume less electricity. Again, another good thing, right? We're using less electricity with these fridges, which are on 24/7. Otherwise, you get spoiled food. So you would think that this is good. The implication of all this talk and technology is that efficiency can play a large role in solving our environmental problems. Citizens are encouraged, just like me and you, to adopt a positive, uncritical, and unsophisticated view of efficiency. So we'll just make things more efficient, and that will enable us to reduce resource use, waste, and emissions to solve our problems and to pave the way for green growth and sustainable development. This all makes sense, right? You can see some of this picture on the right. An Energy Star certified new home. It delivers energy savings up to 30% compared to typical new homes. 30% less energy being used. That sounds like a fantastic thing. And I mean, you can kind of tell from the tone of my voice that I'm building up to something here, right? There's something wrong with this efficiency solution. It's not working. Current environmental multi-crisis, there's depletion, there's extinctions, climate destabilization, ocean acidification, which we'll talk about in another week, plastics pollution, etc. It's not occurring as a result of some failure to achieve these large efficiency gains. There's something else at play here. The opposite, in fact, is true. It's occurring after a century of incredible and transformative gains. Indeed, the efficiencies of most civilizational processes, such as hydroelectrical power, electrical heating and lighting, nitrogen fertilizer synthesis, etc., they've increased by so much that they are now nearing their absolute limits of efficiency, their thermodynamic maximum, as it were, which literally just means that we can't make it better that it's a maximum. For example, engineers have made the large electric motors that power factories and mines exquisitely efficient. Those motors turn 90 to 97% of the energy in electricity into usable shaft power, which is insane. You might think to yourself, well, why don't we make them 100%, right? There's always going to be some loss to heat in terms of energy. Just the way things work, there's always some sort of friction to it. It's a law of thermodynamics. We have maximized efficiencies in many areas, and yet our environmental problems are also at a maximum. So what gives, right? There are many reasons why efficiency is not delivering the benefits and solutions we've been led to expect. One is what's called the Jevon's paradox. So this paradox predicts that as the efficiencies of energy converters increase, oh, my finger kind of like disappeared there, such as cars, planes, or light bulbs become more efficient, the cost of using these items in technology will fall. That's what they predict. Those falling costs spur increases in use that often overwhelm any resource conservation gains we might benefit from increasing efficiencies. Humans, that's me and you, in case you're just wondering, have been brainwashed into being consumers. And I mean, who among us is guilty of having or needing the newest iPhone at release, the best computer for gaming, the newest model of car, etc., etc.? I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody else. So don't think that this is me talking on a soapbox or anything here. This is a humanity kind of issue. This is something that we are all probably guilty of at some point or another. The problem is we are now consuming our resources and creating a larger carbon footprint with the savings and efficiency. So basically, another way of looking at this is that humanity has a problem where we like to live to our means. If you had a job that made you $50,000 a year, you would spend money based off that $50,000 a year. If all of a sudden you were Jeff Bezos and making billions and billions of dollars, you would be making a yacht that was threatening to destroy a British landmark kind of idea. Basically, the idea is that the more money you make, the more likely you are to spend that extra money you have. It's not like if you made billions, all of a sudden you would just throw it all into savings and never touch it. It's the same kind of idea with this. If we have more product, we're going to consume it. So Jevons tells us that the energy efficiency often leads to more energy use, not less. If our cars are very fuel efficient and our operating costs therefore are low, we may drive more. More people may drive. Our cities may sprawl outwards so that we must drive further to work and shop. Great example is the commuter distances to big cities like Toronto. The cost of housing increases in cities, so people move out of the cities further to commute using more resources like fuel. There was an interesting phenomenon that actually happened with the housing market during the pandemic early on. It's still kind of happening to a degree, just if anybody's paid attention to the real estate prices for houses, which kind of helps illustrate some of this. So in a nutshell, and I'm not saying this is the only reason this happened, but in a nutshell, people that were living in Toronto when the pandemic hit, they were working in Toronto or in the surrounding area, and they realized that or there was some sort of change at work that allowed them to work remotely, to work from home, and due to the pandemic. And as a result, they realized, why should I be spending, or why should I have this house that costs, 1.5 million, 2 million, 3 million, however much money the houses were in Toronto, when I can move out of Toronto and move somewhere cheaper. So they sold their house and they moved. We'll use Barrie as an example because that's where, Georgian is. So they moved to Barrie, but they took their millions of dollars that they got from Toronto money and their Toronto house and moved into Barrie and jacked up the prices, because basically it's supply and demand, right? If they want to buy a house, they have the money that they can just dictate what the price is so that they can just buy it outright. There was one situation I actually explicitly heard about where somebody from Toronto paid an exorbitant amount of money, a ton of money, more than the asking price, only because his friend lived on the same street and he wanted to ensure he got the house. So he paid a lot more than the asking price in order to ensure he got it. But those kind of things ripple out, because then somebody else sees, oh, well, they sold their house for that much. I can get my house for that much as well. And then it continues and it continues. But we'll stick with cars as another example here. They remain a great example of the efficiency paradox. We get more miles per gallon, so we drive more miles and we use more gallons. Think about traveling in the summer. When fuel is inexpensive, people plan day trips or long distance driving trips. When fuel prices rose to $1.50 per liter a couple years ago, people started planning on staying home for a vacation. And that's when actually the term staycations came to be a thing and were more popular. Vancouver recently became the highest priced fuel in North America at $1.62 per liter, which is kind of what we're looking at nowadays, citing the carbon tax as a major influence. The Jevon's paradox is a very important concept to know if you're trying to understand our world and analyze our situation right now. Another example of this paradox is the household refrigerator. The average refrigerator today uses 75% less electricity than in 1975, even though it's 20% larger and costs 60% less than it did then, not factoring in how inflation works. It has twice the problem in that the fridge is now in almost all homes because of the affordability, consuming electricity beyond the original fridges of the 1970s. It's basically the idea that we have double, triple, quadruple, quintuple the amount of fridges that we used to have. So even if it's using 75% less electricity as an individual, when you account for how many fridges there are, it kind of negates that. Above that, the refrigerant used then was a CFC, and the refrigerant used today is an HFC. One depletes ozone, the new is a greenhouse gas. So kind of a win-lose situation there. The overall setback is now that they are so affordable, they are a mainstream item consuming far more electricity than in 1975, even though they are 75% more efficient, just to further emphasize what I just said there. So economists who see this correlation as not coincidental call this the Jevon's paradox. It's the idea that improvements in energy efficiency do not lead to lower energy use, but to an overall increase. The concept is named after William Stanley Jevons, who made the argument in 1865 in his book, The Coal Question. So William Stanley Jevons lived in England, and he was called a logician of economics, and was instrumental in the opening of a new period in the history of economic thought. It was not until the publication of The Coal Question in 1865, in which Jevons called attention to the gradual exhaustion of Britain's coal supplies, that he received public recognition. He was worried that as the supply of coal was exhausted, its price would rise. That conclusion was ultimately wrong, however, because it failed to account for improvements in the technology used to extract coal. So in the end, Britain had an abundance of coal due to the higher volume extracted keeping up with the demand. You'll recall the Industrial Revolution that we discussed back in week 2. So one of the first notable industrial advancements in the efficiency of production was in the Industrial Revolution of the 1700s. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain with the textile market. Sir James Hargreaves was the first to invent a textile spinning machine that allowed 2 persons to run 8-yard spindles at once. This was called, the spinning jenny. Right there. This spinning jenny revolutionized fabric production. It produced 4 times the amount of fabric than the original method and reduced the amount of employees significantly, which also increased profits for the company. In 1750, Britain imported 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton, most of which was spun and woven by cottage industry in Lancashire. The work was done by hand in workers' homes or occasionally in shops of master weavers. And then the spinning jetty came around, and in 1787, raw cotton consumption was up to 22 million pounds, most of which was cleaned, carded, and spun on machines. The British textile industry used 52 million pounds of cotton in 1800, which increased to 588 million pounds in 1850. You can see that dramatic increase by year. This began a change in the industrial workforce where fewer employees could do more production. This is the ultimate goal of technology, is to have less people doing more. The capitalistic holy grail, in other words. To a business owner, this was the changing outcome they had all hoped for. Fewer workers created more profit for them. They didn't have to pay a salary for as many people. But this would become the fall of an economy. So how? It created such an outroar from the people recognizing that they would begin losing their livelihoods and be unable to provide for their families. It started competition for the jobs that were out there, further reducing their wages, supply and demand. Basically, it became there's so few jobs out here and so many people wanting them that the companies could basically pay them whatever the heck they wanted. It was exploitation. You're demanding $3 per hour. Well, this guy said he'll do it for $2.50. Oh, this guy said $2.50. Well, this guy said $2. You see what I mean? An unexpected economic paradigm had been developed with an accelerated formula for success in the eyes of business owners. They had to pay cents on the dollar for their employees, and they were making buckets and buckets of cash based off of the increased production of these, just the technology allowing it. Now that cheap labor was available and production was increased, no one had the money to consume the products. The imbalance had begun. The problem was that the increase in supply lowered the price of fabric overall. Instead of it increasing profits, it just lowered the amount of workers and consumers. How does that work? Well, in that example I was just talking about off the cuff about them paying a worker $2 an hour instead of $3 or $4 or whatever, that guy is now not going to have enough money to support his family or himself even, and he surely will not have enough money to go and buy the extra little goodies that he wants just to, live life, the little extravagances. However, over time, people adjusted and started to consume more. The concept of changing underwear once a week began. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but why? Because there was so much more fabric and undergarments that were capable of being produced, it became easier to have more underwear on hand, funny enough. Before this, they were usually just made at home instead of bought in a store. Eventually, the economy grew to match the efficiencies that technology had created. This is what technology does. We create more using less labor, and unless we consume more, there becomes a surplus of labor and people lose their jobs. The change from an agricultural economy to a capitalistic economy had developed a delicate balance in supply and demand. These capitalistic changes were repeated in a larger scale in the development of the Great Depression of the 1930s. So, the Great Depression developed more advancements in technological breakthroughs. There was the invention of the combustion engine, the production lines, there's the transatlantic transportation, there was radio. They made us more efficient than we have ever been before. What actually caused these new technological breakthroughs? War. It says here the Great Depression developed them, but it was more or less the World War I that caused it. There's the one thing that war does a fantastic job of is making countries want to kill other countries, as sad as that is. And the best way to do that is to be more technologically advanced than your opponent. And so war breeds technology. It breeds people just trying to outdo each other. And so you get these technological breakthroughs more commonly in times of war. Overall, between 1923 and 1929, production increased 32% at an alarming rate. Technology and efficiency had increased production, allowing for large increases in consumable goods. So that's what you can see on the right there. Technology increased and goods produced increased. However, wages had only increased by 8%, leaving less money available to consume the products. This is kind of what I alluded to earlier. There was also less labor force because with these technological advances, you needed less people actually building or producing the goods that were produced. And the rippling effect of this formula was the basis for the turn of the Great Depression. So, leading up to the Great Depression, banks were strong and people invested heavily in stocks because of the gains and the returns were large. And an overinflated stock market showed huge returns and a lot of people jumped on board for hopes of great riches. In a real basic sense, stock prices increases as more people buy into it, so the stock market was overinflated with the amount of people involved in it. So if everyone was buying into the stock market, what caused the crash itself? It's known as the Wall Street crash of 1929, the stock market crash of 1929, or the Great Crash. What caused it? Well, as I mentioned before, there was very low wages, and as a result of that as well, there was a proliferation of debt and there was other issues as well. I think the agricultural sector was basically destroyed at this point, but the decline actually began a little before October 24th. It began as early as September and in early October, but by October 18th itself, the fall began. People saw the fall happening and essentially panicked, which is a very human thing to do when you think about it. We had a crash in the stock market just a little while ago, not obviously as dramatic as this, but I'm sure if any of you have stocks or how your parents have stocks or you know somebody with stocks, they were probably talking about that and maybe they dropped out of the stock market at the same time. It's a human thing to see when your investments basically go belly up. Part of you wants to save what you can. So they sold. And on October 24th, Black Thursday, as it's called, there was a record number of shares traded. Banks and investment companies tried to stabilize the market by buying up these loose stocks, which worked temporarily on the Friday. But when the market opened again on the Monday, the free fall continued. Billions of dollars were lost, investors got wiped out entirely, and the average guy, for the most part, they just lost everything. Even by 1932, stocks were only worth about 20% of their original value in the summer of 1929. Imagine buying a stock for $100 and it crashes entirely during the Wall Street crash of 1929, back to mere single digits. Even by 1932, that stock would only have recovered back up to like $20. Companies let workers go because they suddenly had no investors, they had no consumers, they had no profits. And people began to realize that the strong economy was not true. And a panic began to the point where government closed many banks in the United States. Although the Great Depression was relatively mild in some countries, it was very severe in others, particularly in the US, where at its peak in 1933, 25% of all workers and 37% of all non-farm workers were completely out of work. Some people starved and many others lost their farms and homes. It took until the 1940s to pull the economy out of this depression before people felt confident they could trust the economy and the governments to put their countries back on pace. Defense budgets increased as countries ramped up production in order to prepare for war. Which war? World War II. So during World War II, the people were distracted from the setbacks, and the government offset the economy by focusing on the production of materials for the war efforts. That's your tanks, your guns, your airplanes, bullets, and so on and so on. With many gone to war, the population that stayed behind filled that workforce, and during the wartime, the economy in North America and Britain was stable. The United States, after suffering the largest economic depression, began wondering what would happen after the war had ended. Would all the soldiers return to no jobs? Would the economy just go back to the depression again right after the fact? So, after World War II had ended, people returned home and the government set up rules to manage business exploitation. There was no more of this, well, you're paying me $3. Well, I'm going to pay you $3. Nope, I'm going to pay this guy $2.50. President Roosevelt made sure the working class was protected. So, a minimum wage was set. Workdays were also reduced from 10 to 12-hour days now to 8. Unemployment insurance was created, and there was new workplace standards developed. Quite a change, stuff that we take for granted nowadays. All this had been created with confidence in the country and began a new balance between more efficient production and overall consumption of the goods. It created a new consumerist culture. So now that the economy was building and technology was advancing production, we started consuming resources in order to keep up with the demand for goods. The invention of using petroleum to make plastics hugely impacted the production of goods. This now created a disposable world where items were not repaired often but just discarded, leading into a new era of landfill saturation. This is especially true with cars, where if you get a new fender bender, if the repair cost exceeds the price of what the car is worth, people will just scrap it. Time to get a new car. Methods of recycling developed to extend the length of use for landfills. So, we also had to become more efficient environmentally. So, eco-efficiency is simply about doing more with less. This approach involves manufacturing products using fewer materials and less energy while generating less waste, with the goal being to reduce negative environmental impacts. So eco-efficiency is also about designing products to use less energy throughout their useful life to be recycled or reclaimed completely. It has two very serious limitations and is ultimately self-defeating, though. The first limitation was defined by Jevons, as we talked about. The Jevons paradox, or the rebound effect, happens when a product is redesigned to require fewer resources when it is used, or an organization becomes more efficient in its operations. Rather than reducing the overall usage of resources, the paradox is that overall resource usage either increases or decreases less than the efficiency improvement. It's also known as the income effect, kind of as I mentioned before. When something costs less, people tend to use more of it. If it costs less of your overall income, you're more willing to buy more of it. You're more willing to use it more often. Another example of this rebound effect is the gasoline consumption by U.S. vehicles. Between 2007 and 2013, the overall corporate average fuel economy in U.S. cars and trucks increased by 16%, being more fuel efficient, while the total miles driven dropped 2%. We should have seen an 18% drop in gasoline consumption during this period, but the actual decrease, however, was only 5.5% due to an increase in the total number of less efficient and cheaper trucks on the road, most people decreasing their miles driven either slightly or not at all, and many people holding on to their older, less efficient cars longer. I mean, I know I'm guilty that with my car paid off, I'm just going to drive that thing into the ground. The second limitation of eco-efficiency is an effect of glass ceiling. Doing less bad is not the same as doing good. Reducing resource use and waste generated is not the same as restoring and renewing the ecosystems on which an organization depends for its resources and on which we all depend for our life support. When coupled with a management commitment to growth, eco-efficiency can mask the overall damaging ecological impacts of an increased number of products sold, regardless if these products are environmentally friendly or not. Efficiency improvements are not beneficial if the overall consumption is not reduced simultaneously. Basically saying things are, it's more efficient because the product by itself is more eco-friendly, but if more people are doing it, then any gain I get, and if they're only doing it because it's available now, it's not really, the grand total is not being, it's not affecting anything. So the fundamental problem of human existence has been to find ways to extract resources from ecosystems for food, for shelter, clothing, energy, and other goods while retaining the integrity of these ecosystems for life support. We don't want to tear down the rainforest just to use its resources for ourselves. We want to use what we can sustainably, and that way it can grow back and we continue to use it for future generations. And that's what this is explaining here. The goal for sustainability management is clear. Companies must move beyond eco-efficiency, become effective at seeking to balance economic development with the capacity of the earth to support life. The objective is to break through the ceiling of reducing unsustainability and enter into the realm of creating sustainability. Increasing efficiency must equal less impact overall. We need to stop as a species, being reactive to things and start being proactive to things. So instead of finding a problem and trying to solve it after the problem is already a problem, we should be trying, I know it's easier said than done, but we should be trying to find these problems before they actually become a problem and dealing with them. So eco-efficiency is necessary, but not the solution to meaningful change. So at first it sounds like the best way possible to do more with less, but it takes environmental education to actually make this work so people don't take the lower cost of efficiency and begin consuming more of it, therefore defeating the entire purpose. It's merely one tactic or method in a strategy dedicated to developing a better life for all. And that basically takes us to the end of this week's presentation on Jevon's efficiency. So as I said, there's no presentation next week. We'll not be having a presentation next week because I want everybody focusing on the midterm. So the midterm is next week, and it is going to be the entire week from Monday to Friday. You can do it at your leisure. You have 2 hours to complete it. You have to complete it in one sitting. You can't just start it and then pause it or leave. Please take out a 2-hour block of your day during the week at some point and get her done. As I said, it's 25 multiple choice and true or false questions. It's 25 combined, as I said. So it'll be a combination of multiple choice and true or false based on weeks 1 through 6. So it will consist of this material as well as stuff from the other weeks that we've had. You can pull up any of those presentations, any of those worksheets, and have an idea of what types of questions to expect. You can reach out to me if you have any questions about anything coming up. I will be having, during reading week, so the week I guess after the exams, I will be working, or I guess it's technically this week coming up, the week of the wait a sec, am I losing my train of thought here a little bit? Yeah, I am. Okay, so next week during the exam, I will be marking essay 1 and essay assignment 1, as well as the assignment that you handed in before that on fighting climate change. So I will have those completed for you sometime next week. So look forward to that. And I would like to also mention that I lost my train of thought again. I'm just fading, guys. I'm just fading. If I do remember, I'll put it up as an announcement. But essentially, great job on the first assignments overall. I thought you guys did a really good job. If you guys have any questions about how those marks were determined, I did include comments for every single assignment, I believe. But if it was unsatisfactory, or like you wanted some more feedback, or you're just curious and want to talk about it some more, by all means, reach out to me about it. We can talk about it some more. As I said, I'll be posting a link for MLA formatting. I do believe I have it in last week's presentation as well, but I'll include an actual link just in Blackboard itself, just for ease of use. And that's about it from me. I think that I got nothing left. I got nothing, guys. I've got nothing here. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week. Good luck studying for the midterm. Good luck finishing up, or if you've already handed it in with the essay assignment. And I hope everybody has a fantastic week off with reading week. See you later, guys.